Welcome back to the Thrive in Wabash County podcast. I've been looking forward to this episode since before the podcast we even knew that it had a name or that we were going to do this. You were part of my list of people that I wanted to include. You're not Wabash County residents. You did live here for a very short amount of time. You kind of did a little layover here. But today I have in the studio John and LaNae Abnet. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having us.
You do have a connection here to Wabash, and we'll get into that a little bit. But for our listeners, give me a little bit of who John and LaNae were 11 years ago. So prior to your adventure, and we're going to share with our guests what that adventure is, who were you? Where were you living? What kept you busy?
Okay, we lived on 3 acres east of Berne, Indiana, and we lived in an old house. My time was spent mainly gardening and just taking care of things there. I did some volunteering at Crisis Pregnancy Center and some different things. I did some card making and just different. I was always busy. John always says I'm the hardest working non-employed woman he knows.
This is
so,
true.
Yeah, I don't know how I had time to work before I was home all the time. Previously, before we lived on the 3 acres, I taught for a few years. I taught middle school, which that says enough. And I taught math, and then I also taught English. So that was my previously working life.
Okay.
So, John?
Yeah, it's our second marriage. We've been married now
That's
21 years, and obviously it's worked out well. Yeah, to LaNae's point, we lived in a beautiful old farmhouse, 2,800 square feet. We had a huge barn and on the 3 acres, a lot of outbuildings, and I worked in the automotive industry. I still work with the automotive industry some in a different capacity now with my own business, but I worked in the automotive industry for 21 years, I think, and was a tool maker before that and sold motorcycles and did that kind of stuff before that. So,
Yeah, and I guess we have 4 kids between the 2 of us and 11 grandkids.
Jeez,
When we're all together, it's 21 people.
Yeah.
That's what we're all together is 21. So we have 11 grandkids and 4 kids between the 2 of us.
but
4
10 years,
kids.
but 10 years ago we had
We had
2 grandkids.
But we had 4 kids between us, yeah.
Yeah, but 2 grandkids at that time. So,
You would say you lived fairly normal lives?
oh, we were not exciting people. I don't know that we are now, but we were definitely. Yeah, I go to work every day, and she ran the home, and again, the busiest non-employed person I've ever met. But yeah, it was just the day to day, right? You went to work, you paid the bills, you came home, you mowed the 3 acres, yeah.
And so I take you back 11 years because basically 10 years from right now, you were on the Mississippi. And you had chosen to take quite an adventure. And I'm sure the planning had started even prior to that. Any big adventure, it takes time and a lot of dedication. Why don't you sum this adventure up? Give the listener who has never heard of John and LaNae, give us a little adventure recap.
So we did some quasi-adventurous stuff, right? I mean, we like to go hiking, and we took what we call end-of-the-road trips up into interior Canada and even went up to the Beaufort Sea, which is the Arctic Ocean. Just long road trips, right? Camping at night, and we did some stuff like that. But it was just, 2-3 weeks at the most. Just vacation breaks, right? Take an extended vacation from work and go
We put everything we need in the back of our truck
in a
and
truck
go.
and take off. Before I even met LaNae, there was a symposium at Michigan State University every year called the Quiet Adventure Symposium. Now it used to be called the Quiet Water Symposium. And I've been there with some friends 2 or 3 times. It's just a bunch of outdoor folks. So there's side rooms, have workshops, they have presentations, a lot of vendors and such to show up. And it's a really cool symposium. And shortly after we were together, we went up and saw Janet Moreland, who we actually paddled with since, and we got to know her better actually since then. But Janet Moreland had just completed the source of the Missouri River to the Gulf of Mexico.
By yourself.
By herself. And so we heard her speak, and I used to joke with LaNae whenever we crossed the Wabash is, in our backyard. We cross it all the time. And I used to joke with her. I said, you realize you throw something in the river here, it goes all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. It goes anywhere in the world, frankly. And so we're at this, listening to Janet speak up at Michigan State, and on the way home, LaNae said, well, we should take a trip. We heard her take a trip. So from that comment, so this was her idea, by the way. People think I drug her into the river. No, this was her idea. So from that comment on our 3 or so 4-hour drive home, by the time we got home, we had a date picked.
We listened to her speak in March of 2014.
Okay, so it was actually a couple of years. So you mentioned the duration of the planning.
It was 1 year.
It was 1 year.
Yeah, 1 year.
1
Yeah,
year.
sorry. Yeah, so you mentioned the duration of the planning, and it was a full year. We'll get into it more, but her dehydrator ran nonstop for 10 months. So
on
a
our
lot
way,
of planning.
on our way home, we set a date for April the 1st, and we've decided that that's the key for anything is to set a date. Because if you ever say, when you say someday I'd like to, someday never gets here. So by the time we got home, we had a date set and what we were going to do, and then that's when the planning began.
Yeah. And so you ended up kayaking from the source of the Wabash River to the mouth of the Mississippi.
The Gulf of Mexico. And a little side note here, in my ignorance, I always thought that New Orleans was on the Gulf of Mexico. That's 120 miles from the Gulf of Mexico. So we actually went into the Gulf. The place we stopped is called Lower South Pass Island. So we were actually out in the Gulf. So yes, from the source of the Wabash to the Gulf, we kayaked.
So I'm not even familiar with, where is the source of the Wabash?
It is just outside of Fort Recovery, Ohio, in a turkey farmer's backyard, and it's just a drainage pipe that comes out of the ground. And then it meanders to Fort Recovery, and we walked that distance because it was too small to put a boat in.
It's not navigable.
It's just a creek. You could walk in it.
So it's about 18 miles we hiked, and then in Fort Recovery, they call it Ambassador Park or something like that, is where we actually launched the kayaks out then.
So you launched the kayaks there in Fort Recovery.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And you make your way 1,600 miles to the Gulf. There's so many questions that could be asked about the journey itself. And as LaNae and I were talking earlier about the direction that this conversation could go, and there's so many different ways. You guys have had the fortunate, LaNae, you wrote a series, two books.
Mm-hmm.
I have my copy of the first one here that I brought. And so there's information that you can be found about the journey itself in the book. You guys were recently on a podcast, I believe it's called Newt, Northeast Indiana Water Trails.
Water Trail, yes, sir.
And so I'm going to put a link in the show notes to that as well, because I really want our conversation today to focus on some things that maybe you guys haven't answered that our listeners will be intrigued about, knowing that they can get that information elsewhere. We have similar experiences. You guys spent yours on the Wabash River and down to the Mississippi, but there was a time commitment that you made. There were sacrifices that you made in your personal lives and your professional lives. And I have similarly, I have made commitments and made sacrifices to train for events over the course of a year to get ready for Ironman or ultramarathon running. And I think that's part of what people don't recognize that if they haven't been in that situation. But there's a lot of growth, personal growth, that happens in those opportunities. LaNae, I don't know if writing a book was ever on your radar, but by saying yes to an opportunity, it really opened up the door, I'm sure, whether that was something you thought about or not. It presents itself. And so I want our listeners to kind of get a deeper look into some of the things that come out of an adventure like this that everybody they don't even know to ask the questions about. So real quickly, I do want to cover the basics. So 1,600 miles over the course of what time frame?
3.5 months.
3.5 months.
We had hoped it would take 4. We were planning on 4 months, but then the river rose and we had to hurry up. So
Okay.
we did in 3.5 months.
And I'm sure these questions are asked by people that you run into. Non-adventure kayakers are probably curious about these same questions. Where did you sleep?
In a tent on the banks of whatever river we were on.
And you ate probably the same place or occasionally in a town?
We would stop about every week to pick up our food package, and then we would usually eat something in the town then. Otherwise, it was dehydrated food every night.
Yeah, let me speak to that just a little
Yeah.
bit, because again, I want to get back to the intent of the conversation, but that is a question that comes up a lot. And we found out we were unique in that. So about 50 units, and again, those numbers, they come and go, but In our research, about 50 units attempt to paddle the Mississippi, which would start in Lake Itasca up in northern Minnesota to the Gulf. About 50 units attempt that every year, Adam. And in general, about half of those people make it. And by unit, I mean for somebody by themselves, 3 guys in a canoe, 50 units is a term I'll use. And those folks almost always, and I'm sure there's exceptions, but they get a ride into town to restock with food. This woman ran a dehydrator for 10 months, and that's not an exaggeration. She bought an industrial dehydrator. And for 10 months, she vacuum packed and dehydrated and vacuum packed 720 meals and desserts and breakfasts and 720 meals of food. And we lived off that, and we had it shipped ahead. She had it all boxed, and then I would let a friend know where to ship the next box, because each box held a week's worth of food, and our kayaks would hold a week's worth of food. And then, because, there's nothing out there. There's no place to stop and eat. There's no hotels. They're between towns, which actually worked out to about a week between. There's just nothing out there. You're way between the levees, and there's just nothing out there. And so, we lived off of food that she, in the year prior in prep, had all dehydrated and vacuum packed, and we found out that was unique. And so she's a bit of a rock star in the paddling community. We've done quite a bit of public speaking, but she's the one they continue to ask back to speak just about the food prep, because,
From a nutritional standpoint,
That was the reason I decided to do it. When I started to look at, because we always have eaten just very healthy. I mean, what we eat, we can pronounce and that kind of stuff. And when I started looking at the freeze-dried meals that you can purchase, one, they're expensive, and John wasn't going to be working, so that seemed kind of not like a smart thing to do. But two, the ingredient list was, like a paragraph long, and I'm like, the time that our bodies needed to have the best nutrition, I didn't want to start all of a sudden adding all this stuff that wasn't good for us. And that was really the impetus into, okay, what's my option? And that's when I started to look into dehydrating, and I used the stuff from my garden, and so we could pronounce everything we ate.
yeah. And
Even desserts. We even had desserts, so we ate well.
Yeah, that's the other thing. She grew most of this food. So it's, some was purchased, but she even grew a lot of it. So,
and which makes it even the fact that you guys were able to plan this in a year even more impressive. I would think that it would take a year just to think about that we're going to grow, and then what do we plant, then dehydrate. I mean, it could easily be a 2-year program.
But the fact that we started our planning in the spring helped, because that's when I would start, okay, first of all, we need to decide what we want to grow. So it was one step. So it was very helpful that we started in the spring, because that's when the garden started, and I could plant what we needed.
Yeah. So from one of my other co-hosts, I sent out a question this morning. I said, hey, what's something that you guys would want to know about John and LaNae's adventure down the river? I'm sure you've gotten this question before. For me, it's not that crazy, but they want to know, where did you go to the bathroom?
I knew it.
I knew that's what was going to. I knew that was the question.
Knew it.
There were many times I wished I was a guy, because it's so much easier. And in the book, you'll see it several times. Boy, I don't like being a girl sometimes. So for a guy, it's very easy. By the end of the trip, I got callous to things. You just find a little tree to get behind and take care of things, or you find a levee and.
Yeah, again, there's a little story here, Adam, but I don't know how graphic your listeners want to hear this. But again, one thing that, and of course we were ignorant too, so I'm not saying this critically of folks, but people don't understand until you do something like that. There is nothing out there. When you're going between Greenville, Mississippi and Natchez, Mississippi, there is nothing out there. It's just wilderness. And so when you're off the river, it's a piece of cake. It was when you're in civilization was an issue. What we learned to do is you didn't want to pull into a town and when you had to take a leak, because now you're right there in public with people, and so now you're kind of out of luck. So that was the worst situation. For me, if I had to take a leak, I would use I had a small dry bag. When I say small, it might have been a 1 liter or something, a little, you hold it in your palm of your hand, dry bag that I could manage in the kayak. But in a kayak, these are sea kayaks with a very soft chine, and they're very narrow cockpits. So even for me, it was a challenge. Frankly, I probably didn't drink enough water. We love coffee, and on the trip, that was something we didn't drink because you didn't want to have, that's diuretic. You don't have to increase the times you had to go to the bathroom. There's a story about the levee wall. I don't know if you want us to go into it now, but there was a story where she urinated on the river, and I clapped. it was probably the dumbest, most dangerous thing I've ever seen anybody do. And I've done some pretty stupid, dumb things in my life, dangerous things. This was ridiculous. And I don't know if you would tell about it or not, but
Go for it.
Well, it was flooding, and that's the thing. Once it started to, because see, before, if we saw a beach, once you get to the Mississippi and you're going to stop, it's a big conversation because it's 2 miles wide in some places, and you have the current. So you have to decide, okay, we're going to stop there, and you have to start almost paddling upstream in order to get to where you need to be. But then when it flooded, we didn't even have those beaches. There wasn't any place to stop. So yeah, I had to go, and then there wasn't any place to stop. There were no beaches.
If the river, Adam, is a mile, 2 miles, mile and a half wide, the levees might be 3 miles apart.
Mm-hmm.
And so you never got to the levee.
When the water was down at
When
regular.
Yeah, but when it's flooded, then you're suddenly having to go through trees and over these beaches you would normally camp on to the levee, because that was the next stopping point of the river, was now the levee.
And the levee is like at a 45-degree
And so, yeah,
angle.
picture a 45-degree concrete slope that you're not climbing up. And this thing's, there's no way you're going to climb up a levee when it's. And so she said, I got to pee. And I said, well, good luck. I said, and I told her, because, we had neoprene summer weight, like wet pants. You can, like a wetsuit, but just the pants, or a 0.5 millimeter, very, very thin, that we wore even in the hot weather. So I said, just pee in your boat. She goes, I'm not peeing in my boat. I'm like, it's plastic. You got neoprene pants, just pee. We'll rinse it out when I get to the sun. She goes, I'm not peeing in the boat. And so we paddle out. She goes, I got to pee. And I went, this ain't happening. She goes, I got to pee. And all of a sudden she goes, I have an idea. She goes, get me to the levee. And this is on a strong current, a flooding Mississippi River, and we got to go through trees.
And then you also have the boats coming by, which also
Yeah,
create a wake.
there's the towboats, and by that time maybe some ocean-going ships. I don't know if we were south of Baton Rouge. It doesn't matter. Anyhow, we got it. Yeah, this is not just a paddle to the shore. So she says, get me to the levee. So I said, okay, come on. And so I moved towards the tree line, right? And then I pick a path, try not to die, and get through the tree line and get up to this levee wall. So now these waves, because it's tumultuous, right? These waves are crashing into this levee wall. And here we are in our kayaks up along this levee wall. Well, one of the ways to get in and out of a kayak is to put your paddle, we actually do it quite often just on a normal entry and exit. You put your paddle behind you across the cockpit and extend one side out against the shoreline like an outrigger. And then you just lift yourself up, sit your butt on the stern of the boat right behind the cockpit, and you just swing your legs over and hop up. It's a very common way to get in and out of kayak. So, unbeknownst to me, she's already got her pants down.
You had to go.
I did.
And so we get along this levee, and I can't, to the listeners, there's no hyperbole, I can't communicate the fiercity of the way these waves are smashing us up against this levee wall.
And the currents pulling us
And
down.
yeah, the current's wanting to pull us down. So she pops her paddle behind her and lays it up against that levee wall and pops her butt up on the back of the kayak. Well, once she does that, she's actually kind of anchored. It kind of settles down a little bit. And I'm behind this just trying to survive, right? Because it's bashing me back and forth between trees and the levee. And then she does this amazing thing, Adam. She puts one foot in the seat of her boat and swings the other foot out of the boat onto that levee wall, lifts herself up with the outrigging behind her, and pees in between the levee wall and the kayak. It's crazy. It's ridiculous.
Didn't pee in your boat.
Nope, not in the boat.
And so, anyhow, I don't know how much detail the listeners want to hear, but it was amazing, dumb, dangerous, but I clapped.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I'm sure she's glad I shared that. Yeah.
So you had a unique opportunity to see from the beginning to the end was a massive change of the environment you were in. But the day-to-day, there were these minute changes. Were there certain ones that like stick out to you, like where you merged into the Mississippi, things like that really stand out? How did you, over the course of that 3.5 months, 3.5, 2.5?
3.5.
3.5 months. How do you remember that change happening?
I remember, so from the source of the Wabash to the end of the Wabash, the river gained size considerably. But there wasn't what I look at as dangers that changed. So really the Wabash, there weren't a lot of dangers. But then as soon as we turned, it was actually almost like turning on a T road because the Wabash, when it enters the Ohio, and you turn right, And immediately, now all of a sudden, the danger are the towboats. You have towboats that are, and I remember
Real
I
quick for the
was-
listeners, a towboat is a boat that pushes barges. The name tow comes from the towpath back in the mule days. It's a long story, but they're still called towboats, and they push these massive barges. So sorry.
So,
go ahead.
and I was really scared about those because I think about the wake that a ski boat would put out, like when we would be on, and I'm like, okay, I had all planned. I turned the boat and I was facing the waves and I was prepared, and it was hardly anything. I mean, it was something I was so scared of, and it was really hardly anything. So we had our first introduction into that, and then the next danger was at Cairo, where we actually went into there was a lot of fleeting. And that's a scarier part because you have towboats going everywhere, and then you have what they call harbor tows, and they're smaller, and what they do is they move the barges from place to place, and you never know when they're going to pop out, and they're fast, and they do create quite a wake. So then that was the next, so the fleeting was the next thing.
Let me interject. Cairo, and it's not pronounced Cairo. It's Cairo, Illinois. It's at the south tip of Illinois, and it's right at where the Mississippi and the Ohio River merge.
So then the next danger that we knew was coming was the Mississippi. And what's interesting is where the Mississippi and Ohio merge, the Mississippi actually is smaller than the Ohio.
Oh, okay.
And we weren't even sure if we had entered the Mississippi yet. I turned to my right and I'm like, oh, there's a bridge back there. I think we're on the Mississippi now. So it really wasn't it was just a small merge. Then we entered the Mississippi, and just as soon as we hit the Mississippi, now you have wean dams and different things like that. That's a new danger. And we ran over one of those right away and then knew that we need to avoid those from there on. And then when you get into the Mississippi, where the Mississippi and Ohio merge, well, the river gets a lot larger. And then our next danger were the towboats pushing bigger barge loads than what they had on the Ohio.
Much bigger.
Much bigger.
Much.
So then we get used to that. And then the next thing are the ocean-going ships, which make the towboats look like little matchbox. These things are just huge, and they're quiet. The towboats are very noisy. What kind of diesel engines? And
Yeah,
they're
they
noisy.
have 2 or 3 screw diesels and putting out 12,000 horsepower. They're loud, yeah.
Yeah, we knew they were. I remember the first night when we were on the beach and we heard one of those go past because they go all night long. I thought it was a helicopter landing. I was like, what is this? But they're loud, so you know when they're coming, and they're slow. The ocean-going ships are quiet, and they're big, and they're fast. And we do not show up on the towboats nor the ocean-going ships on their radar. We're just like a little speck. So we had to be aware of where they were.
And they're probably not used to looking out for
No,
for
we're like a
kayaks.
twig.
You're on your own, and plus they can't negotiate. They can't just turn on a dime. It takes forever. So, yeah, you're responsible to stay out of there. This is their job, and this is their interstate, and it's where they live and work. And for multiple reasons, most importantly, your own safety, is to make sure you're taking responsibility if you're going to be out there, to stay out of their way and know where they're going. And so,
Yeah, and then the next danger were, the bigger fleeting areas and below Baton Rouge, it's just very commercial. There's harbor after harbor after harbor. So I remember thinking that I'm so glad that we started in the small Wabash, and the dangers just kept growing. Because if we would have started in Baton Rouge, where you had the ocean-going ships and you had the towboats, that would have been just very scary. But pretty soon you get used to it, and then that becomes your norm. And then you put something else in, and then that becomes your norm.
I think
Yeah.
that says a lot, though, in my own experiences of racing. I got up to where I was racing Ironman level, and there are people that all of a sudden they remember seeing it on TV or something, and they're like, I want to do an Ironman, and they jump in and they want to do an Ironman. That's not where the experience, and that's not where the growth happens. The growth happens when you spend time on the Wabash and you learn,
absolutely.
and then you move to the Ohio,
It
and you
becomes your
continue.
norm. It becomes your home. It becomes your,
Yes. And there's a lot of appreciation that happens along that way. There's no easy pill, and it's not the easy button to go, oh, I'm going to just jump on the Mississippi. You actually grew along the way.
Yeah, and that's a much smarter way to do. And of course, that's the metaphor for so many things in life,
Yes.
right? I mean, and tell a little bit. So you talked about the dangers, LaNae. Tell about the seasons and the other changes that you noticed as we went down the river, because you wrote about that quite a
We
bit.
started in April, and it was cold.
No, April 1st.
It was extremely cold.
Yeah.
I mean, we got up and there'd be frost over everything. And then by the time we stopped, it was summer. And so
In Louisiana.
In Louisiana. So we
miserable.
as we were going, we saw spring happen. We went from, no buds on the trees to buds on the trees to the flowers. And when you're at home, you kind of see it, but you don't really see it. And when we were on the river, we had time to really see it and really appreciate it. And that was one of the things I hadn't expected, was just to actually experience. You had the time to just really experience things.
Everything slows down. I mean,
yeah.
Good way to put it, Adam, yeah.
I do it. It's different. I'm on a bicycle, but you cover 100 miles on a bicycle, and the things that you experience and you pick up on are different than the ones that when you're in a car.
Absolutely.
And the ones that if you're running, is different than when you're cycling. And I can't imagine what that would have been like on the river.
Well, and on the river, like you just said, experience from the car. And that was one thing that I talk about a lot in the book, is our river view, how different it is from the land view, how different it is from the road view, and how few people have got to experience that river view.
Yeah.
And I just felt very privileged. I think, how many people see this? Nobody. I mean, it's just very few people get to experience that river view. And when you go over a river on a bridge, you experience that river for just a few seconds, if you can see the river. Because so many times you go over a bridge and you can't even see it. We experienced it day after day after day, and not just for a few seconds at a time. And just to see the birds, and when we were on the Wabash, you got to have the squirrels run beside you all the way, and it definitely is different from the river than what it is from the road or from land.
Last year in June, I did 100 miles on the waterways of Wabash County, whether the Eel River or the Wabash River.
Cool. I didn't know that. Cool.
And it really didn't start off as a goal. It was just an afternoon activity. After I get off work, I could drive to LaGros, I could float back to Wabash, and then I would jump on my bike and I would ride back to LaGros to get my truck.
Yeah.
And learning where you are at in relationship to other things that you see when you're driving. So knowing in this bend, I know where I'm at now. But when you're down in the river, you don't see that. You don't see it that
So
way.
different.
And I've loved taking new people onto the river, sometimes for their very first time in a kayak. Sometimes it's their first time just on the Wabash. But to have them experience that, because it's so unique.
So different.
And that brings us back to Wabash, the town, where, they're properly exploiting that river, with outfitters now that have kayaks and canoes that put people on the river, and you're starting to see people use the river more. And the more people interact and utilize those resources that we've taken for granted and actually exploited negatively by dumping things into them out of sight, out of mind, and the more we put people in connection with those natural resources, the more they appreciate them, and the more they'll take care of them, because now it's not something they drive over, it's something they've experienced, and there's a totally different perspective in looking at things that way.
Yeah. So let's get into that. Let's get into that connection with Wabash that you guys have. Obviously, you've floated through here, but tell me, how did you get connected? I'm going to try to step out of this conversation.
To the town of Wabash.
How did you get connected to the town of Wabash?
Well, first of all, so John had maps, so he knew a lot more of what was going on than I did. I was just kind of following along. So, and we're paddling, and I knew we were going to stop in Wabash. You had said that's what we were going to do, but I didn't. As we're paddling, I see this campsite, and it says it's for people on the river, and I'm like, oh, look, there's a table, and but there wasn't any. There wasn't a boat launch or anything. There wasn't any way for me to get from the river to that campsite that said I could stay there.
Yeah, it's just a muddy bank, 20 feet tall and steep. There's no way you're getting up there.
I was so disappointed. Like, I don't understand this. So then you say it wasn't as far as I felt like it was, but it was a ways down. Then we saw the boat launch. Well, then you have the boat launch, and I'm like, okay, but from here, where is that campsite from here? I had no idea. We had no idea where the campsite was from the boat launch until you were looking.
There's
you were looking.
There's a really nice.
There is a
footpath.
nice, but we didn't know it. We didn't know there wasn't a sign that said campground or anything like that. But we did finally get there, and we're sitting there, and we're having just sitting there and relaxing. And who comes by but Adam Stegman? And so Adam is the reason we are here now. He really is. he stops and he talks to us for a little while, and then Adam, you take your part from here.
Well, I have to say that, for one, I recognized that you weren't just campers on the river, that you just weren't a regular kayaker. There's if you're used to seeing adventurers, you kind of get an idea. You guys had these long
Sea kayaks,
kayaks. You had the gear, and so I was out on an evening run, which I did all the time along the river trail. The one thing that's unique is that a lot of times I'm not going to stop and I'm not going to start a conversation with someone. But it's also not every day that you see two people with these sea kayaks on the Wabash River. And so I stopped and we started to have a conversation and realized that you guys were very, very early on into your journey. If you're going to get to the Gulf, you've got a long ways to go. And we chatted for a good long while. And I continued on with my run. And then I came across Angie Beecham. And I don't even know that I would have put two and two together if I hadn't seen Angie. But I knew that Angie's husband, Mike, had also done some river adventures with their kids as they grew up.
And was key to putting that was kind of Mike's campsite. I mean, he and the River Defenders had put that campsite there.
Yes.
With kind of grandiose ideas that people would come along like this and use it. So
I say something to Angie. I say, hey, Mike, home. I just met this couple that's down by the river, and they're kayaking the whole entire length of the Gulf. And if I remember right, he actually wasn't feeling well. He was at home.
He was not, yeah.
He was at home, and he wasn't feeling well. But she reached out to him, and knowing Mike.
She said it was miraculous how he was no longer sick. He just popped right up.
So, Mike, I know you listen to the podcast, so thanks for listening. But he comes down, and I wasn't there for that conversation. But you guys talked for quite a while.
We did. I still remember him walking down the hill and sitting down on the picnic table, and he crosses his arms and he goes, "We need to talk." I was scared to death. I thought, oh no, they're going to ask us to leave. I know that sign said we could stay here. And then the more he talked, then I realized that yes, we did need to talk. He needed to tell us some things, and that we had some similar things, and he gave us some
we learned
insights
some things,
on
Mike's
some
been
things
on
to
these rivers a lot.
because we had no idea what we were in for. And come afterwards, after we had finished, and then talked to Mike maybe a year or so later, he said he gave us a 50 chance. I thought, thanks.
Yeah.
But so we proved him wrong. But yeah, he was a wealth of information for us.
Yeah.
And of course, become a great friend since. So just fell in love with Mike and Angie in years to follow. So
Yeah. And you've even volunteered your time. You come back into Wabash, even though you just live outside of Wabash County here now. You come back to Wabash every year, and you volunteer at the Wabash River Defenders event. And I know I've seen you at First Fridays and Chili Cook-Off, and
And what's the River Wild? The River Wild with the sixth graders.
you participate.
We've done that a
We've
couple
done that
years.
a couple years.
Okay.
And I come back for the bike ride.
Yeah. So on that note, we'll get to that when we talk about living at Wabash. I don't want to jump ahead because we did live here then for a year. So.
Yeah, well, LaNae, let's get into that. So you would continue on. You prove Mike wrong, and you complete 1,600 miles of your adventure down the river. We talked earlier. You guys said you live kind of boring, normal lives.
Yeah.
You woke up, you went to work every day.
Yeah.
What was the plan to come back into like the real world once your adventure was over? Was there a plan?
So it's interesting when you call it an adventure, because it was a way of life. And I remember as we were on the trip, my dreams became river dreams, and I was so excited because this was my life. It wasn't just an adventure anymore. This was my life. This is what we were doing, and we were doing it together. Our goal was to get up, travel some miles, stop, and live. I mean, and that was a goal together, whereas at home...
When she says live, she means not die, is what she means by live.
Yeah. But when we were at home, we were going so many different ways. John goes to work, I'm doing that, but it was my life. And at that point, it didn't feel like it was an adventure. It was how I was living. Mm-hmm. And I remember when we got to the end of the trip, I cried. I'm like, a year of planning, and we did it, and it's over. And then I also was very sad. A year of planning, and it's over. My river life is done. Just like that. With one last stroke in the Gulf of Mexico, and my river life was done. And we were in the truck going home. And I remember it was a little while before my dreams returned to land dreams. And I was very sad because then I knew my life wasn't the river anymore. And so when people call it an adventure, it's interesting because as we were on there, it didn't feel like it was an adventure. This was our life. This is the way we were living. And so when we got home, before we left, when we got home, my life was pretty much the same because I started taking care of my garden and all that stuff again. Yours is what changed. Tell about your...
Yeah, I had enough networking in automotive. I wasn't really too concerned about, and even if I didn't go back into that industry, but I wasn't really too concerned because I just quit. People say, well, how do you get off work that long? Well, you quit your job is how you get off work that long. And no, we're not independently wealthy. No, that wasn't something that we're not in the type of people that are in a position to do something like that more than probably most of your listeners that just have average day jobs. And so, yeah, there was a risk in it, but I wasn't too...
We saved, we had a year to save and we knew how much we were going to need put back to pay our bills while we were gone and a buffer for when we got back.
So I want to get into it, but yeah, closing up the house and prepping the house and setting up remote payments to be able to find Wi-Fi once a week or whatever, or a cell signal to be able to pay bills remotely. All that stuff has to go into it. But yeah, we closed the house up, emptied the fridge, shut things down, disappeared for almost 4 months, and then to LaNae's point, once we reached the Gulf, 3 days later, I was mowing my yard. And you talk about a culture shock. I mean, there's actually a term for it. I forget what it is, but the hikers and talk about experiencing it and such, where you may know it, Adam, where it's kind of almost a depression.
There's a blues that you go into.
And we both experienced it, and much more. I would have been very cynical if I'd heard somebody say that ahead of time, but it was kind of a deep thing for a while.
I experienced the same thing. My first Ironman, I trained for a year for it. And that's where a lot of that growth occurs and self-confidence. And there's so many aspects of it that I'm sure you guys went through as well. You just almost like you're living in a different world because a lot of the things that you used to deal with, they just aren't important anymore. Exactly. And you have your priorities. Everything from what you eat to when you sleep and if you're going to go out or hang out with friends, it all becomes really clear when you have your mind on a certain goal. And I remember in Louisville, Kentucky, my first Ironman, you go in with excitement, and then 3/4 of the way through, you're like, I just want this to be over with. And there's more anger than sadness. But I'm nearing the finish line, and out of nowhere, I start to sob.
Oh, I did too, after the trip.
And I thought, I'm in the race, and I'm like, what is going on? It hit me so fast and unexpected. And it really, exactly what you said, LaNae, I knew that I was about to finish something that I had just put a year of my time into, and I didn't know what was going to be next. Mm-hmm. And I suffered those blues, like you talk about, for a while afterwards because I didn't have that thing I was motivated to do every single day because I was working towards a long-term goal. And it took me a long time to figure that out.
Well, and I think part of I got to the place where, like I said, I loved my river life. And I had to figure out how was I going to merge my river life with my land life and still keep part of that.
Yeah.
Because I know I couldn't keep all of it, but what were we going to do to keep part of it? And I think as the years went on, we did figure that out. But go back to your stuff.
Yeah, and so like I said, like 2 days or 3 days after we got off the river, I was mowing my yard. And it was just, the culture shock is just, again, to the listener, it's hard to describe because I would have been very cynical if I were hearing somebody say this like I'm saying. The almost a depressed situation you go into and kind of a lost. It is really hard to explain. But then the one thing, of course, then I went back to work, and a year or so later, started my own business, which is what I'm in now. But that transition period, everything you had before, I shouldn't say everything, but so much of what you had before is diminished. Mm. And we lived out of, 75 square feet, if you count up within our boats. For 3.5 months, we had 75 square feet was our home.
And you had moved from like a
800 square foot home.
28, yeah.
And so suddenly you're mowing 3 acres and you're taking care of things, and you suddenly realize these possessions, I don't own them, they own me. Mm. And it just became, it wasn't planned. I'm not that kind of person. I'm a very pragmatic Midwest, grew up on a farm. But suddenly this all seemed just frivolous and ridiculous, to be honest. And so how long after our trip did we make the move to Wabash?
Our trip was in 2015.
We finished in July.
We moved to Wabash in October 2017.
So just over a year after we finished the trip, well, through that period, 2 years. So through that period, Adam, we just, Yeah, we just thought this is crazy.
Were you having these thoughts and you were having them independently or together? Were you having these conversations like, this doesn't feel right and we need to be doing something differently?
Together,
I
wasn't it?
think we would talk about different things and realize that we were both thinking of the same thing.
Yeah, thinking about how we can live simpler. And so, I'll kind of fast forward, but we gave everything away. I remember we didn't have a chair at one point. We watched
We
the
didn't
TV.
have a chair. We had
So this
nothing.
one young lady came with a trailer. We just loaded a bunch of furniture up and stuff, and she was giving her stuff out of the pantry. And when she left, I sat on the floor and watched television. We literally gave everything away in multiple places, except the stuff we wanted to keep, which is much limited. And because we were looking for a place to rent,
So we had 32 acres, and we had put part of it into wildlife management. And we hadn't planned to live there, but we wanted to take what was in farming and put it into wildlife management. And that's something we did in early 2017 before we even thought about getting rid of things. So that was in wildlife management, and that's a key here too. So that we put that in, and then we decided in May of 2017 we want to go smaller, and we had that land. So we thought, well, we can build a very small place there, and that's when we started drawing up our plans. The house part of our building is 750 square feet, and then we have
it's like a big garage with an apartment in the end is what we ended up building.
we had to have room for our kayak.
but we really did reverse engineer. I mean, we literally walked around with tape measures measuring, like, I remember we had a little tractor, and we were measuring the footprint of our trailers and our tractors and the chest of drawers and the bed frame and stuff. And we reverse engineered the plans for the building based on what we owned,
Yeah,
what we kept.
Okay, this wall has to be this size because that's where this chair goes that we kept. And everything we kept had some meaning to us. It
And
had
purpose,
to be
and
purpose,
real purpose.
real purpose or in real meaning. So we had that all set up, and we needed a place to stay. And I saw
We were
that-
going to sell our house. It was going to take about a year to build
Build
ours, so
house.
we need a place. Yeah.
So we thought, well, first we thought it was going to take like 4 months. So I happened to see that Angie and Mike had a place above Modoc's for rent.
It's a coffee house here in Wabash.
Yeah, and so I got a hold of Angie, and she said, "Well, you have to have a lease on that." And so we were only planning on 4 months.
That's right, yeah.
She goes, "But we have a cabin."
She was
that,
she was very apologetic. We had this old cabin, and when she says old, an authentic, like 200-year-old log cabin. I won't get into that old story, but before they dammed the Salamone, it was an original homesteader's cabin, and they moved it and reassembled it.
But I fell in love with it. I was like, "Oh, this is awesome."
And she sent us a picture. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like a cover of a magazine.
I got to celebrate
It
New
has
Year's.
a pond out there. It's gorgeous.
Anyway, so we were there, and it took longer than 4 months. It actually
Thankfully.
did take a year. We got here on first Friday of October 2017, and our last day here was first Friday of October 2018. We were here an exact
Exactly, yeah.
year. But when I go back to the 32 acres that we had, and since we had that 32 acres, we thought, well, that's where we'll build. While we lived in Wabash, there at one point I almost wished we didn't have the 32 acres because I wanted to stay here. I didn't want to, but
she cried like a baby
I
when we
did.
left
So if
Wabash.
we wouldn't have had the 32 acres, we would have been living in Wabash, somewhere around here. But we had that 32 acres, and that's what kept us over there.
So I feel like I'm kind of jumping around here a little bit, but from your experience of passing through Wabash, and you passed through a lot of communities along your way,
Every town on the 500-mile Wabash River.
what, from an outsider, you now live outside of Wabash County, you still come here, and I know you work remotely from Modoc's occasionally, and like I said, I've seen you at First Fridays, and you guys volunteer here, but what makes Wabash different in your mind?
Wabash is a unicorn. I mean, downtown Wabash, Wabash has its challenges and it has its outskirts and such, no more than any other small Midwestern town. But the downtown area, especially of Wabash, is just a unicorn. And again, we've seen every town on the Wabash River, the 500 miles of the Wabash, and there is no other town of Wabash on the Wabash River. Some of it is fortuitous, right? Some legacy with the Honeywell and the Honeywell Center and such like that. But just organizations like you're involved with, which is Grow Wabash County.
Visit Wabash County.
Visit Wabash County. Yeah, organizations like Visit Wabash County, we've noticed that the age of the people that are involved, it's a youthful demographic that's driving, as an outsider, our view at least, the impression is it's driving the growth of this city. It's much more forward-thinking than the towns that I've lived in, the towns that I've experienced that are this size Midwestern town. Much more forward-thinking. The growth is obvious and it's continuous. There's just constantly something going on downtown, and it's progressive. It's not the type of thing you generally see grow up in a small Midwestern town. You know, when you walk past the new flats and things that are in downtown Wabash, you could be in a Columbus, Ohio, and experiencing things like this. You have a tapas bar. I want to enunciate properly, a tapas bar here in downtown Wabash, and that's just not found in a small Midwestern town. And there's artwork, and there's artistic evidence of the artistic world in Wabash. The Eagle Theater, the multi-million-dollar renovation of that, and then it's not just renovating the theater, it's bringing in this outside talent. Like, what was the event we just went to with the Wabash event, and then with the recent one we were just at, I can't think of what it was called, but you know, you bring in these.
We've got the Arts Academy as
these
hosted.
graduate student musicians from around the country that come in and collaborate and develops music together, and then, you know, exhibit it for folks like us to watch and enjoy. There's just a vibrancy and a youth in Wabash that I just don't experience in quote unquote similar Midwestern towns.
Well, and I think too, you have a lot of outside activities that you like, you know, they have the rivers, you have a lot of, you know, biking and running, and there's a lot of outside. People aren't just stuck inside their house. There's things outside to do. And I think that when people find things outside to do, it's just a different type of an atmosphere. And another thing I noticed too is you guys have some things in the past that you could promote more than what you do that you don't, but you don't need to. You aren't hanging on to the past that we were the first
electrically lit town.
Yeah, there's other things too that were big deals, but you don't focus on that. You focus on
that's
here.
not relative to a 28-year-old
Right,
professional nowadays.
You focus on the here and now and what we can do to go on instead of living in the past and saying, "Oh, look what we did." That's relevant for like a minute or two, and then everybody forgets.
That's a good point. And so many of the towns that are comparable in size and location to Wabash, they do that. They continue to focus on these things that got them there originally. And while that's important and historically relevant, that's not attractive to a 28, 32-year-old professional. The world we live in now where, you know, I do most of my work at home, where young professionals can work remotely from anywhere. Wabash is a town that, from my observation, would be a draw for that demographic. You know, compare the cost of living with, you know, San Francisco or Seattle. You know, if you can give that kind of a cool vibe with a lot of outdoor activities and such that are a draw to this current growing demographic in our world that's going to run the country now and in the future, if you can create that vibe in a Midwest town where breakfast is $6, right? And you can rent a house for $1,500 a month, or I'm not even sure what it is, but yeah, what an opportunity. And Wabash is capitalizing on that, and so many of your peers are not.
My co-host Alex likes to point out the fact that more and more, especially of the younger working people, they're looking for a place to live and then finding employment.
Yeah, quality of life has got an importance that when I was growing up, you know, it was all about how many hours you worked. Well, that's not how people are focused now, and I think that's a good thing. Yeah. People are looking at where can I get quality of life, and then I'll work from there.
And it's not to say that, you know, you mentioned San Francisco or an LA or there are certain people that they love and they thrive in that environment, or Denver, Colorado.
Sure.
And that's the other thing is we aren't trying to be San Francisco or Denver, Colorado. We don't have those amenities, but the amenities that we do have, we're trying to make the most of it. Mm-hmm. And if somebody is going to choose to live in a Midwest, if they want to live in a quiet community where cost of living is important, we just hope they'll give Wabash the second look versus, you know, another small community our size.
Oh, and they should. Yeah, it's worth the visit. To LaNae's point, we would easily have moved downtown Wabash or somewhere in this community because the people, you know, we've got more friends in Wabash than we do where we live. Mm. And we're an hour and a half away from here, where we grew up, and we have more friends here.
LaNae, earlier you mentioned that you came home from this adventure, I'll call it an adventure again, your life on the river, and you had to kind of find the new balance of how do you live that life of adventure and being on the river, but also have an income and stuff like that. How did you find that balance when you came back?
One of the biggest things we did was when we downsized, because when you have a lot, it takes a lot of your time to take care of that. And so that by getting rid of that burden, then you're able to slow down more and be a little bit slower like you were on the river. By living where we are in our 32 acres and a small place, we do spend a lot of time outside. That's our space, and that's as close to living on the river as I can be.
So you didn't need to replicate the entire environment of living on the river. You pulled the important parts out, that what you realized was that you needed to slow down, not have the other distractions of the busy day-to-day life, and then you've made that work in your new life.
Right.
But you guys still get out on the river. You do some
Not
water.
as much as we'd like to, but we do. Well, we take a few trips, and to most people, they probably would seem like big trips. To us, it's not that big of a deal because it is, We've been in a swamp in Georgia, the Okefenokee Swamp, and paddled with the alligators.
That was a 5-day, that's
Yeah.
a 500,000 acre swamp, and we were out there for 5 days. That was cool.
And
Yeah.
if I remember right, because I've heard this story, I think you've told me you actually like camped on platforms
Yeah.
that they've built.
There's no-
there's
not
there's
any-
nothing-
there's
there's
no
there's no
banks.
earth
Yeah.
in the swamp. So yeah, they have platforms out there that you can pitch tent. Yeah.
That'd be a cool experience.
Yeah, that was totally different. It was fun to count all the alligators. We counted
She counted 127 in 5 days.
70
so,
of them in one day. That was a big
yeah,
day.
So they're everywhere.
When you're on the river or on any of these adventures that you're on, one of the big things that I took out from doing like a 100-mile race and doing the long training hours, for me, the idea of time completely changed. And it's one of the things that I had a hard time explaining to people. People would ask me, about the race, but they didn't know to ask that question. But I had a really hard time explaining to them that was one way that I grew and changed, is that time didn't mean the same thing as it did before. Waiting in line at a grocery store, or if you've got to paint a bedroom and it's going to take you 2 hours, like the 2 hours didn't mean anything to me anymore. What did you guys experience that you didn't know you were going to gain or grow from that? But what changed for you guys?
Well, we learned to live by the sun. As far as the weather is what dictated a lot of our decisions. If we saw that it was going to be rainy, or something, we would make sure. I mean, the rain would decide if we went anywhere in a day. If you looked at the radar and it was going to rain all day, you just turned over and went back to sleep. When we got to the southern states and it was so hot, we got up earlier to make sure we got our miles in before it got so hot, and then we'd get off. But nature dictated what we did. It had nothing to do with the clock, and you wanted to make sure, you were in bed before it got dark. So or before the mosquitoes came out. Nature was what dictated and we didn't even have a watch. So we didn't know what time it was or anything.
Yeah, that's the way LaNae put it, is spot on. In line with what you said, Adam, because you're spot on as well with the time reference. Time is artificial. It's actually interesting if you research a little bit where time came from in the establishing of a time. It's artificial. Nature is not artificial. And to your point, when you're in that environment, when there's not a deadline of somewhere you have to be or something to complete or someone to call, or when all those things disappear, Adam, then to LaNae's point, nature drives everything, and there is no time. It's just nature. If you want to paddle at night and take that crazy risk on the Mississippi, I know some people have done it. I wouldn't recommend it or do it, but you can.
You ate when you were hungry.
You're driven by nature and not by anything artificial. And I've really learned that word artificial. I use that a lot now, more than I used to. The things that we do in this world and the things that we build and the things we buy, it's not bad. I know I love going to a nice dinner. I love going to a show. I love hearing live music. I love, there's certain things we buy, although with our space, we're very, aware now of what we purchase because there's nowhere to put it. So we're very frugal in regards to having just things. But so there's nothing wrong with that. But those things that I just mentioned are really kind of artificial in regards to humanity and nature. And so there's a balance there between enjoying the fruits of what we as mankind have created versus what nature offers. Yeah. It's just important to remember that those things we've created are artificial. And so temper, how we approach that with some pragmatism and without losing that connection to nature, because emotionally, physically, spiritually, I think humanity has disconnected. I know humanity is disconnected with nature too far. And we now provide these camps and places to send people to touch nature. And that's artificial, right? I mean, that's not the way we were created. And we were created as part of nature, not something to go and touch once in a while. And so, anyhow.
Yeah, I think we could talk.
Yeah, I could go down that pipeline too far.
Definitely. I think we're on the same page, though. And you guys put yourself in an uncomfortable position. You fell in love with it, and it became life that you really wanted. But that was a change, and you put yourself in an uncomfortable position into an environment you weren't familiar with, growing from the Wabash to the Ohio to the Mississippi. In the same way that, I intentionally put myself in tough situations where you run extra longer than you have
Very
before.
tough. You put yourself into.
But there's so much growth that happens, not just physical, but spiritual and mental, that happens in those times. And like you said, everything is now artificial. Everything that comes out in this world nowadays is about making things easier. The sofa's better for you, the bed's better for you, the car's more comfortable. We are not intentionally putting ourselves in difficult and hard situations. And so when we are faced with something difficult, it could be a relationship, it could be something that comes up at work, we don't know how to react and to face that and to overcome it. And I think it's really going to show itself in the decades to come. And that if you can't find that way, maybe it is artificial. I mean, me going out and running or riding is artificial. I'm not chasing game. I'm not chasing my supper for the night.
Yeah, but it's still part of humanity. It's not artificial in regard to, you're not in a car, you're running, right? And again, I have a car. I appreciate my car. But aside from running, the car is artificial. Running is not, right? I mean, that's a human trait.
It is a human trait. We used to have to do that to make sure that we could feed ourselves, But if we're not doing that now intentionally, we can get really soft and we can lose that ability to adapt and to overcome when we are faced with challenges.
And I think it's good to have those out of the ordinary goals. And that's what you're talking about too, is your running is an out of the ordinary goal. And when you have those, your mind works differently and you look at things differently. And I think it makes your life more interesting because you have something to look forward to that's out of the ordinary. And I think that's one thing too, but also makes you more interesting is when you have made those out of the ordinary goals. You may still be the same person. You're still Adam. I mean, I don't feel like we're still just ordinary people. We're not extraordinary, but we do make some maybe out of the ordinary goals, and we do that. And that's what keeps my life probably more interesting to me anyways, is by having those out of the ordinary goals and meeting them.
One of the things that I've kind of pressed on my kids and then my friends, we've now gotten into this mindset of, it's a term that I came up with probably in the last 10 years. And it's what I say is adventure in your own backyard. Mm-hmm. So where that came from is that I love to go to Colorado, Utah, Idaho. My boys and I, we've traveled to a lot of national parks. And for a while, when I would come back from one of those adventures or one of those trips, there was like an emptiness in me. And like I wanted to be back out there. And that's normal. That's natural. But I needed to appreciate what was right here and what could I do right here. And it didn't take a vacation. It didn't take a tremendous change in my life. But there were opportunities right here. So, I found ways of going out to Salamone and, connecting two dots. So connect Mount Etna on one completely far side of Salamone, and I would hike all the way to LaGros. And, because
That's a significant hike.
It's a significant hike. I had covered all of the different trails in there, but I had never linked it together. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to make this happen.
The struggle and without struggle, there's no growth. And again, we learn that from nature. You look at a tree and the way they grow when there's been struggle involved, generally stronger, maybe pointing in a different direction. And just a lot of metaphors here. You can equate adventure living and adventure activity and natural activities and struggles with growth. And so within life, there's a lot of metaphors you could apply that to. And you certainly know that from the marathons and the Ironman, such stuff that you're doing, because that's a growth I'm not sure I want to force myself into. But
Then, we were talking about the adventure in your own backyard and, going from, Mount Etna to LaGros. And, it's not to showboat. It's not to, but there's something that I know happens internally when I do something like that. It's something I worked for, doing the research, finding out the trail. Like, how do I want to do this? I don't think enough people put themselves in those uncomfortable positions to do that. And so I wish that's my main wish of if people can hear this and hear these stories and realize that we can do things out of the ordinary, and we should do things out of the ordinary, and there's growth there.
And the thing is, I think, too, that we need to remember, too, that everybody's out of the ordinary is different.
Absolutely.
So many people have, we tell them about our story or about what we've done. And one thing when they said, well, I could never do that, I'm like, well, don't ever say you could never do anything, because not always, unless you physically have something that keeps you from doing it. The thing is, I would prefer not to. But that doesn't mean that you can't find an out of the ordinary thing to do. You just need to find a different one. Just like I would prefer not to do the Ironman. I don't know. I guess I could say I can't say I could never do it. I might, finish 5 days later than everybody else. But it's something I would prefer not to. But that doesn't mean that the next out of the ordinary thing is wrong.
So you're just saying the response should be, I prefer not to do that, not that I could never do that.
I could never, and I prefer not to, but I will look for this. Just because I prefer not to do that doesn't mean that there's not something out there that's different. Well, it's not just certain things.
Yeah, and we're talking about physical feats and activities, but it could be somebody that's not comfortable speaking in front of a crowd, but putting yourself in that uncomfortable position and doing that. Maybe it's a group of 5 people to begin with. But I promise you that if you do it over and over again and you get uncomfortable, that will become comfortable.
Yeah, learn a language, play an instrument, it can be, to your point, it can be anything.
Or read a lot of books, have a goal of how many books you're going to read, or read different kinds of books. I've never really read Westerns, maybe make myself read a few Westerns. Something that's just out of your ordinary.
Grab a Louis L'Amour.
Yeah, exactly.
And do a deep dive.
Exactly.
Yeah, and you said something earlier, LaNae, about setting a date. And I would, again, talking about somebody listening, whatever it is, set a date. Because one of the things that a tenet that we've kind of informally embraced is always having a what's next. What's next? It doesn't have to be, and it hasn't been for us, a 1,600-mile paddle down the Mississippi River. A few weeks ago, we did 41 miles on the Buffalo River down in Arkansas. It was beautiful. But even for some folks, that's a big trip. So do a mile on the Wabash. Yeah. Or to your point, read a book. But always have something that's next. What's next? Always be asking yourself, what's next?
That's great. That's a great point. And you mentioned the kayaking or canoeing down the Wabash. We have White Rock Recreation here in Wabash. Yeah. They can rent. They'll shuttle you back to LaGros and back and forth. Great opportunities there. Get out and try it. Is there anything else that you want to share with our listeners today?
I think sometimes whenever you have something, Adam, you and I were talking about this, about your growth and stuff, is I don't think you realize, before our trip, one of the things I said is, I can't wait to see who I am when we finish this trip. If it doesn't change me, then there's something wrong. But I did not realize how much it would change me. And I think every time you go just outside of your box, even if it changes just a little bit about how maybe you do your daily life, that's a good change. But look for that change. Don't let it be something that's just happens. And
recognize it.
Recognize it and give yourself some kudos for it, too.
And, be willing to say yes. To opportunities that have changed like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And be ready to say yes to a lot of things.
Yeah, we did not expect our lives to change. We didn't go into it for that. We had there was no intent for our lives. We did not expect to be living in a 750 square foot home on 32 acres of wildlife habitat. This just all evolved and was certainly motivated by and spurred on by doing something out of our ordinary. And so I would say surprise is what's awaiting you, is do something out of your ordinary. You don't know.
You know, I started this conversation by asking you to describe your lives 11 years ago, and I wanted to wrap up by asking you to describe your lives today. But I think you've already done that. It sounds like it's simpler. It's in multiple ways, but you're still living adventure. You've been able to take some of that life from 10 years ago on the river and make it your life today. So I think that's great.
Exactly.
We didn't get to talk much about the River Defenders, but you did mention Mike Beecham, and Mike will be coming on the podcast in the future.
Cool.
Oh, good.
And we'll do a full episode on the River Defenders and the impact that organization has had, not just in Wabash County and our rivers, but even downstream.
It's a great group. I miss going, when we lived here, we went to the meetings every month. And I miss that. I miss the crew, the interaction, and the types of activities they're involved with and the reach they're having. Yeah, very cool group doing good things, good people doing good things.
Like a lot of other organizations in Wabash County, I think they're getting recognized, and people are asking, how are you doing that? And that's amazing to know that Mike is working with the people in Terre Haute because they're downstream and they want to know how can they make an impact.
You guys are a benchmark.
Yeah, the river connects us all.
That's right. Thank you both for coming into the podcast studio tonight. Looking forward to sharing this episode and this story with our listeners. As I mentioned earlier, LaNae did write 2 books. This is number 1. This basically covers your journey to the Mississippi, correct? And then the second takes you down the river from the Mississippi, the rest of the Mississippi.
And the title, Paddling Edna, people keep asking us, who is Edna? We're not going to tell you.
You got to read the book.
You have to read the book.
Got to read the book. So thank you both for being
Thank
here.
you.
Cannot end the show without thanking a lot of our community partners that make this all possible. Special thank you to our supporters, the City of Wabash, the Gilman Investment Fund, Sandra Kunkel Trust, Mark and Amy Ford, Paperworks Industries, the Community Foundation of Wabash County, Visit Wabash County, and obviously this production is made possible by the Destination Wabash County. Thank you for joining us this week, and we'll see you next week.